Hey guys, welcome back, or maybe welcome for the first time, to tonight's long, soft ramble through the dusty corridors of ancient history. Grab your blanket, maybe a warm drink, unless you're one of those people who can fall asleep holding a mug, in which case, impressive, but slightly concerning. Tonight, we'll be strolling, slowly, very slowly, through the lives of some people who are still with us in a way. Sort of. Not alive, but wrapped, bandaged, boxed up, and sitting quietly in museums or locked storerooms. Yes, tonight we're talking about mummies, but not in the usual, ooh, cursed tomb, or let's talk about linen bandages kind of way. No jump scares, no sandstorms, and no Brendan Fraser. Instead, we're going to talk about who these people were before they became mummies, because before they were turned into tourist attractions or fragile collections of dusty bones and resins, they had lives, often complicated ones, sometimes dramatic, sometimes petty, often weirdly bureaucratic. Many of them were born into families with far too many siblings named the same thing. Many of them were married off to cousins, because of course they were. And most of them had no idea their bodies would one day become a centerpiece in a Victorian drawing room. So tonight, think of this not as a story about death, but about awkward, very human life. Just one that happened a few thousand years ago, in a desert, under a sun that was already making everyone a little cranky. Let's start with one of the most famous, yet persistently misunderstood royal mummies, Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. Ramses II is the poster child of ancient Egypt, at least in how 19th century Europeans like to imagine it. Statues everywhere, temples with his name on them, because why not sign your name on everything? And a reputation as one of the longest reigning pharaohs. He lived for around 90 years, which in ancient Egyptian terms was about as close as you could get to being immortal without divine paperwork. He ruled for 66 of those years, long enough for several generations of courtiers to be born, rise to power, and die while still having to hear, "Oh, Ramses is still in charge? Cool." But before he became the leathery, slightly orange-tinted museum piece we now call his mummy. He was a man with a family so complicated it makes your aunt's third marriage look like a fairy tale. Ramses had, at minimum, over 50 sons and 50 daughters. Some records say over 100 children total, which is the kind of number you only get when you have a harem, a title, and apparently nothing better to do in the evenings. His primary wife was Nefertari, often depicted in reliefs as a beautiful queen, though, let's be honest, Egyptian artists weren't exactly known for accurate individual portraits. She might have been stunning. She might also have just been okay with a really good PR team. Ramses married other wives too, including some of his own daughters, because, again, ancient royalty loved to treat the family tree more like a family wreath. Incestuous marriages were not necessarily about romance. They were more like a way to keep the divine bloodline undiluted, or more accurately, concentrated, like a bad reduction sauce. So what was Ramses like as a person? Well, he was a bit of a show-off. His ego was mummified long before his body was. He liked to take credit for victories he didn't really win, most famously at the Battle of Kadesh, which was basically a draw, but he had his artists carve entire walls declaring he was a military genius. Imagine someone drawing a comic book of themselves winning a fight they didn't actually win, and then building it on a 200-foot wall. That's Ramses. Now, fast forward to his death. By the time he died, his body had already been through decades of arthritis, hardening arteries, and probably a personality that just refused to leave. The priests embalmed him, wrapped him carefully, gave him all the standard equipment for the afterlife, and tucked him away like a VIP going into long-term storage. He was meant to rest for eternity. But eternity in ancient Egypt turned out to be, well, a few centuries. Tomb robbers happened. Priests moved him around. Eventually, his mummy ended up in a secret cache of royal mummies in Deir el-Bahari, alongside dozens of other very famous, very dead people. And here's where it gets delightfully ironic. The man who built colossal temples to be remembered forever was remembered not by his statues, but by being hauled out by archaeologists and shipped to Paris in 1976 for passport and pest control treatment. Yes, Ramses II, the great pharaoh of Egypt, traveled to France with an actual Egyptian passport that listed his occupation as king, deceased. You can't make this up. His hair was treated for fungus, his body was fumigated like an old couch, and then he was returned home to a climate-controlled case where he now lies looking both majestic and faintly annoyed. Let's float a little sideways now to another royal mummy, Tutankhamun, or as the tabloids like to call him, King Tut. King Tut's mummy is famous, but his actual life? It was not exactly the stuff of epic sagas. Born to Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to revolutionize Egypt's religion by telling everyone to worship a sun disk instead of their usual long list of gods, Tutankhamun inherited a very awkward political climate. Imagine being a kid whose dad just tore down every temple in town, and then you, at 9 years old, have to fix it all. That was Tut. He wasn't born Tutankhamun, by the way. He started as Tutankhaten, meaning the living image of a 10. Later, when the whole sun disk experiment fell apart, his name was changed to Tutankhamun, meaning the living image of a moon. It was less about his identity, more about his parents saying, "We're so sorry, we'll put the old god back on the letterhead." Tut married his half-sister, Ankhesenamun, because, once again, pharaohs really did not have a broad dating pool. The two likely shared a father, which means their kids, had they survived, would have been, well, genetically adventurous. In fact, evidence shows they had at least 2 daughters who were stillborn. Tiny mummified remains were found in his tomb, a tragic reminder that all the gold in the world didn't buy healthy genetics. Tut himself wasn't exactly robust. CT scans of his mummy show he had a clubfoot, malaria, and a bone disease. Artists often depict him standing proudly, but in life, he probably leaned on a cane most of the time. There were 130 canes found in his tomb, so either he had a very strong accessory game or he really needed them. And his death? Still debated. No, not murdered by a blow to the head. That was just bad X-ray reading from the 1960s. More likely, an infection in his leg plus malaria plus general being inbred and frail did him in around the age of 18 or 19. Hardly the golden boy king some wanted him to be. Then came Howard Carter, 1922, and the discovery that launched 1,000 mummy movies. Tut's mummy was unceremoniously examined, unwrapped, cut apart, set on fire accidentally with too much heating resin, yes, really, and then reassembled like a slightly tragic jigsaw puzzle. Today, his withered body lies in a glass case in the Valley of the Kings, still wearing the expression of a teenager who just wanted a nap and instead got a century of flash photography. Now, let's glide gently along the sands of time to someone less famous, but in their own way, equally fascinating. The Screaming Mummy. If you've ever seen that one mummy with its mouth wide open, looking like it just got bad news about the afterlife, that's probably him. Officially known as Unknown Man E, this mummy was found in the same royal cache as Ramses II. For a long time, people speculated he was poisoned, buried alive, or screaming his way into eternity. The reality, as usual, is less dramatic. His mouth probably just fell open after death because rigor mortis relaxed, and the wrappings weren't tight enough to keep his jaw shut. Still, never underestimate the power of a good facial expression to create 3,000 years of ghost stories. Who was he? The best guess is that he was Prince Pentuer, a son of Ramses III, involved in what historians call the harem conspiracy. Basically, his mother and a group of palace officials tried to assassinate Ramses III so her son could inherit the throne. Spoiler, it didn't go well. Ramses III got his throat cut, yes, but Pentuer and the conspirators were caught. He was forced to commit suicide, likely by hanging or poison. And instead of a royal burial, he was given a kind of punishment burial, Animal skin wrappings, lack of ceremony, and probably no journey to the good side of the afterlife. So the screaming was less about pain and more about, well, history leaving you looking very memeable. So we've met Ramses II, who got himself a posthumous passport. We've peeked at Tutankhamun, the teenage king with more canes than walking ability. And we've given a nod to the screaming prince, who really didn't get the burial upgrade package. But what about the women? The queens, the princesses, the royal daughters who were often both princess and queen because, yes, we're going to say it again, the pharaohs loved to keep things in the family. Let's start with one of the most iconic female mummies, Queen Tiye.